All right, so if you've been following the conversation around FND, you probably get the what of it, right? These are very real, often debilitating symptoms, but they don't stem from a typical neurological disease. The real head-scratcher, though, is the why and the how. And that's exactly what we're going to get into today. We're going to go way beyond the basics and unpack the complex roots of FND using a framework called the Biopsychosocial Model.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to completely reframe how we even talk about this. For ages, conditions like FND have been trapped in this really unhelpful debate. Is it all in the mind or is it a problem with the body? This kind of black and white thinking has caused so much confusion and, frankly, a lot of harm. But thankfully, the science is finally showing us a much more connected way to look at it.
And this really gets to the core of it. This quote from Mark, a patient living with FND, just says it all. You know that old mind-body split we were talking about? This is the human cost of it. The idea that your symptoms aren't physically real is it's so incredibly invalidating when you're living with them day in and day out. It's a frustration you hear from patients constantly, and honestly, from a lot of doctors too.
And this is where we see a real game changer in how FND is understood. You see, the old way, that was a diagnosis of exclusion. Doctors would basically run every test imaginable, and when they all came back negative, they'd say, well, it must be FND. And that often came with that awful message, it's all in your head. But now, the whole approach is flipped. It's a rule-in diagnosis. Neurologists are now trained to look for specific, positive clinical signs that say, yes, this is FND. It's not about what the illness isn't anymore. It's about what it is, a real, identifiable problem with how the brain is functioning.
Okay, so if we're saying it's a problem with brain function, what does that actually mean? What is happening inside the brain? This is where we get into the bio part of the model. Let's dive into the neuroscience because this is where things get really fascinating and we can see the physical evidence.
So let's start with this really fundamental question. What makes a movement feel like it's not yours? You know, patients aren't faking it. They truly experience their tremors, their paralysis as happening to them, not by them. So how can a movement, one that uses the brain's voluntary motor pathways, feel so completely out of control? Well, it all comes down to a concept called self-agency.
So what's self-agency? It's that automatic, totally seamless feeling that you are the one controlling your actions. You know, when you decide to pick up your phone, you just do it. You don't even think about it. You feel like the author of that action. Well, in FND, that fundamental process gets scrambled. The brain might send the command to move, but that critical feeling of, I'm the one doing this, it goes missing.
And we can actually see this happening in the brain. It's not just a theory. Check this out. In this amazing fMRI study, researchers looked at people's brains during an FND tremor and then asked them to voluntarily mimic that same tremor. And what did they find? A huge difference. During the real involuntary tremor, a part of the brain called the right temporoparietal junction, or TPJ for short, was way less active. You can think of the TPJ as the brain's command center for telling the difference between me and not me. So when its activity goes down, the brain literally gets confused and can't recognize its own motor commands. And that's where that terrifying feeling of this isn't me doing this comes from.
So, okay, how does a quiet brain region lead to a physical tremor? It's all about a process we can think of as the brain's prediction machine. See, your brain is constantly predicting the future, even just a millisecond ahead. Before you move a muscle, it creates a little simulation, a prediction of what that movement is supposed to feel like. Then it sends the go command to your body. Normally, the actual feeling from your body perfectly matches the prediction. It's a smooth process. But in FND, there's a glitch. The prediction is off. So the brain sends the command, but the feedback it gets doesn't match what it was expecting. It's like a system error. And the brain's response to that mismatch is basically, whoa, that wasn't me. It interprets its own movement as foreign, as involuntary. That's how the sense of agency just vanishes in that predictive glitch.
But here's the thing. That biological glitch, that system error, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. And this brings us to the psycho part of the model. And I have to be really clear here. This has nothing to do with someone making it up or the illness being just psychological. Not at all. It's about how our internal world, things like our emotions, where we focus our attention, our past experiences, can actually shape the brain's wiring and make it more vulnerable to those glitches.
So researchers are looking at a few key things here. They're seeing differences in how emotions are processed, that sense of agency we just talked about, and also attention, like maybe the brain's attention gets locked onto the body in an unhelpful way. There's also something called interoception, which is basically your ability to feel your own internal signals, like your heartbeat or your breathing.
And the key is that all of these things feed back into that prediction machine we were just looking at. They can kind of tune it to be more likely to misfire. And this is where life experiences come into the picture. Now, it's really important to say this is not true for every single person with FND. But what we do see in the research is that a history of significant stress, trauma, or adverse events is more common in this group. You can think of these experiences as creating a kind of biological vulnerability. They can actually prime the brain's predictive networks, making them more sensitive and, well, more likely to have those kinds of glitches we've been talking about.
And that leads us to comorbidities. Now, this chart is just from one study, so it's a snapshot. But it illustrates a really important point. There's often a big overlap between FND and conditions like anxiety and depression. And they're not just existing side by side, they can influence each other. Think about it. If you're already highly anxious, you might be more tuned into your body's signals. That intense focus can then feed the FND symptoms, which in turn can make you more anxious. It all gets tangled up together in a really complex way.
Okay, so we've looked inside the brain. We've looked at psychological factors. But we can't stop there. We have to zoom out and look at the world around the person. Because how we experience any illness is massively shaped by how other people react to us. And with FND, this social piece isn't just a side effect of being sick. It can be an active ingredient that makes the entire condition worse.
Just listen to this. This is a quote from Lynn, who was a healthcare professional before she developed FND herself. And she's admitting that she used to believe what her colleagues taught her, that it was all made up, that you just have to go along with it. I mean, wow. That shows you just how deep this stigma runs, even inside the very medical system that's supposed to be providing care.
And Lynn's story is unfortunately not unique. It's shockingly common. A survey from the charity FND Hope found that 85% of patients felt that doctors didn't believe them. Let that sink in. 85%. That's not just a few bad apples. That is the overwhelming default experience for people seeking help.
And you can imagine the devastating impact of that, right? When the people you turn to for help, when society itself tells you your suffering isn't real, you can start to question your own sanity. That external disbelief becomes internalized. It turns into this corrosive self-doubt and shame. And you end up asking yourself these impossible questions.
So here's the most important point of all. We can't look at any of these things in a silo. The biology, the psychology, the social context, none of them tells the whole story on its own. They're like puzzle pieces. To really truly understand FND, we have to see how they all lock together. And this table really lays it all out. So you've got the bio piece, those disrupted brain networks, the glitch in the prediction machine, the loss of self-agency. Then you've got the psycho piece, things like how we handle emotions, where our attention goes, our life history, all the stuff that can tune those brain networks. And finally, the social piece, the stigma, the disbelief from others, which can either pour fuel on the fire or, hopefully, help put it out. They all play a part.
But it's more than just them playing a part. They create what you could call a vicious feedback loop. And this is probably the biggest takeaway. So imagine it. Maybe there's an underlying biological vulnerability. The brain's wiring is just a bit predisposed. Then a stressful event or a psychological trigger kicks off the symptoms. But then the person seeks help and is met with disbelief and stigma from the outside world. What does that do? It ramps up their stress, right? And that stress then feeds right back into the brain, strengthening those faulty neural pathways we saw earlier, making the symptoms even worse. The cycle literally powers itself.
So, breaking that cycle, that is the absolute central challenge. The first step is what we've talked about today, seeing FND for what it is. Not some mystery of the mind versus the body, but as a complex brain network disorder that's tangled up with a person's life and their entire social world. So the question we're left with is this. Now that we see the whole picture, how do we build treatments that tackle every single part of that loop? Because it's not enough to just do physiotherapy. We have to address the whole system. We have to validate the patient's reality, and maybe most importantly, we have to educate everyone else to finally break that cycle.